Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The latest evidence shows the fatal shooting of a 19-year-old man in San Francisco's Bayview district may have been self-inflicted, following a week of anger directed at police. Hundreds of inmates wind down their 3-week hunger strike against harsh conditions in isolation units at Pelican Bay State Prison. The state is sued for its plan to redistribute billions of dollars of redevelopment funds. And a conversation with San Francisco Superior Court presiding judge Katherine Feinstein about deep budget cuts to California's court system. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel are Michael Montgomery, reporter for KQED News and California Watch; Josh Richmond, legal and political affairs reporter for the Oakland Tribune; and Joshua Johnson, morning newscaster for KQED News. Joshua, let's start by talking about what are some of the concerns that have been raised around this whole affair, and why is there so much upheaval over it?
Well, the concerns seem to fall into two basic buckets. One has to do with the actual actions of the police in general towards people in the Bayview. The other has to do with the environment in the Bayview and the conditions that may have given rise to what happened on Saturday. Let me set up what happened Saturday, and we can go from there. San Francisco police say that they were making an investigation into a fare evasion of a young man who came into the back of the Muni T3rd line around 3rd and Oakdale. That young man apparently took off running. Police pursued him, and that's when they say that he fired somewhat indiscriminately, perhaps over his shoulder, perhaps under his arm, back in the direction of the police. They fired back at them, return fire. It was around that time that we begin to see YouTube videos of what we now know as 19-year-old Kenneth Harding, a parolee from Washington State, lying on the ground in the 3rd Street corridor with an angry crowd of people amassing around him, bleeding profusely. It's a pretty grisly video. The medical examiner's office now says that the bullet they retrieved from Kenneth Harding's head is a .380 bullet, not the right size to have come from an SFPD service weapon. The forensics also show that Kenneth Harding's right hand had gun residue on it, which would support the notion that he fired at the police first before they fired back at him. But all of that, it seems, has not necessarily calmed the anger among those in the Bayview who say that this is just one more example of what they consider to be a long history of widespread, generalized police brutality, not just from SFPD, but pretty much from police in general as they see it.
You explained that the video was pretty gruesome. It shows a young man bleeding on the ground and officers surrounding that area and screaming people around that. Why did the police officers decide that no one should approach this man? Because they thought he had a gun still?
Well, you know, often in terms of law enforcement and first response, there are jurisdictional issues. I mean, there are certain things that even paramedics are not allowed to do if they don't have the proper training. The law enforcement community would probably tell you that just because a person is wounded doesn't mean they're dangerous. You know, a cornered animal can still fight. And so just the idea that he's on the ground bleeding doesn't mean that he doesn't still pose a threat. And the law enforcement experts we spoke to this week said exactly the same thing.
But no gun was recovered at the scene, right?
Haven't found the gun that matches that bullet. No, they found a gun, but Chief Greg Sir has said they have yet to find the gun.
And how have the police tried to deal with this week?
Well, they tried to deal with it by coming directly to the community. There was a town hall meeting on Wednesday night at the Bayview Opera House about a block away from where the shooting happened. Chief Sir, who used to be the captain in the Bayview for about 3 or 4 years before he became the chief, attended the meeting. Supervisor Malia Cohen, who represents District 10, attended. The president of the Board of Supervisors, David Chu, was there. And the idea was to allow both sides to talk, but it quickly dissolved into chaos.
We have some videotape from that night and just showing how the crowd was responding. You shot it, Joshua.
But if everybody could just do it at the microphone instead of everybody yelling at the same time.
Yeah, the only thing I would modify from that is that it wasn't everybody. It was a very loud, concerted crowd of people who were determined to just take over the meeting. The minute the Chief Sir took the mic and began to explain the events that I just explained to you, a chorus of boos began, and enough people rushed the podium to just derail the entire conversation. The Opera House was packed way past the gills of people who really wanted to hear him, but as soon as that core of people who were so mad and determined not to trust anything the Chief said rushed the podium, the rest of the crowd began to file out. Within about an hour, even the Chief left, and by then the meeting was pretty much over.
I want to ask you about the role of the media, and I mean that really broadly. People with cameras. We've seen lots of YouTube videos. What impact has that had on the perceptions of what happened?
You know, if you go onto YouTube and you Google Kenneth Harding, or even if you Google Oscar Grant or Derek Jones, any of the names of the controversial police-involved shootings over the last year or so, you'll find videos of the event, and you'll find videos that were edited by other people who clearly have, you know, more than enough wherewithal to buy a camera, a tripod, a mic, and, you know, Final Cut so they can edit it themselves. There's this whole other thread of conversation that's taking place on digital media among black people who will post on their own. They're not going to come to me and say, oh, please come tell my story. They're going to go tell it themselves. And I've gotten into a few YouTube, just today, a YouTube debate over whether or not you can fire a .38 caliber bullet from a police weapon and maybe they doctored the gun. There are these two threads of conversation that are going on. We haven't even gotten to the issue about jobs in the Bayview, just in terms of trying to reach people who have decided we are not going to listen. We've waited long enough. We're going to have the conversation among ourselves. That's part of the challenge I think the Chief's going to have to get over.
Mm-hmm. Talk about the demonstrations. Who were they? There were demonstrations that followed this. Who took part? Where did they happen?
There have been a couple demonstrations. There was one on Monday afternoon that happened near the Opera House, which seemed mostly composed of Bayview residents at least watching. A number of the people, though, that came in for these demonstrations, both Monday and Wednesday, the one that walked through Mission and Dolores where there were so many arrests, have not been people from the Bayview. There were even some of the organizers at Monday's protest. Some of the local business leaders that I've met were leaning over to me and I said, who are these people? And they were like, we don't know who these people. We thought you knew who these people were. They were clearly parachuting in. Even the protest in the Mission, SFPD says they arrested 47 people. Only a handful of them were from San Francisco, and I believe only one of the San Franciscans was actually from the Bayview. So there's a lot of non-specific anger at the police that is playing out now.
So what's the next step? What happens now?
No one really knows for sure. The organizers who put together Wednesday's meeting at the Bayview Opera House say they want to try again. They're not sure exactly when. San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee was in the Bayview today. He didn't answer any questions about the shooting and has yet to really go on the record about it. He told one of the local activists that he would arrange a meeting at some point in the future. It won't be immediately because he's going to be in D.C. on Monday with the Giants meeting the president, but we'll see what happens.
Well, this is a new controversy. Michael, we're going to talk to you about one that is almost as old as I am, and that is what's happening at Pelican Bay in terms of the hunger strike that was going on there.
And that's winding down. There might be a few inmates still refusing food in other prisons, but at Pelican Bay, the strike is effectively over. And it was quite a dramatic turn of events this week. On Wednesday, we had medical officials from the Department of Corrections talking about a cluster, a handful of inmates showing early signs of starvation. This was 2.5 weeks into the hunger strike. By Thursday, we got news from the Department of Corrections that the strike leaders at Pelican Bay in the security housing unit, that's this isolation unit, that they had agreed to call off the strike. It moved very quickly. We now know that the department officials, one of their top officials, had gone to Crescent City to meet with these strikers who the department says are dangerous gang leaders, and they had reached some kind of an agreement. The department says it gave no concessions. The strikers and their supporters say the department made promises to change policies about gangs and about who gets locked down in these isolation units. It's a little unclear what was really agreed to, if anything, and we're waiting to get, a little more clarity on that.
What is there a reason why there's such a wide gap between what those who support those on hunger strike say and that which the department is saying? And
Well, I think like any negotiation, there were some understanding that there needed to be some kind of a face-saving way to get out of the situation. The inmates say that they have been given an agreement to have winter caps, calendars, maybe one photo a year from their families, possibly telephone calls. It doesn't seem much to us, for someone who's been in isolation for years, maybe decades, it's a big deal. But what I think is important is they got a senior official in the Department of Corrections to travel up and to meet with them, as equals in a sense in
and they did
negotiation.
So in a sort of an unprecedented show of interracial and even intergang unity, right?
Well, this was quite striking. I've been in these facilities. They're quite divided in terms of the racial and ethnic groups and in terms of people who are in the gangs. To get inmates to come together on an action, a protest action, not just at Pelican Bay, but to see it spread to 13 other facilities, that is a show of strength and a show of unity, and perhaps folks in the department were a little bit nervous about that.
Can you describe you described this to me on KQED News about a couple weeks ago. These units are almost defy belief, the way that they're operated and the way that they're composed. What are these units actually like on the inside?
Well, keep in mind, Pelican Bay was opened up in 1989, an era of when the supermax prisons were sort of proliferating around the country for the worst of the worst. So they were built in an era when rehabilitation wasn't even in the mission of the department. They're windowless. Inmates simply do not see the outside world in their usual, daily routine, except on television. So it's a very eerie atmosphere. It's very antiseptic. The cells themselves are painted white. Inmates get out of their cells for about an hour to shower and to exercise. But again, it's a windowless exercise pen. The thing that's really eerie is how quiet it is in there. There's not a lot of sounds. The inmates don't make a lot of noise. So it's a very strange.
As a rule.
As their own
it's
rule.
kind of kept
as a rule of respect to others. It's a very strange thing. But you don't hear yells or screams or anything like that.
Talk about some of the other prisons where this is taken effect. And how many people overall are we talking? Do we know?
Well, we have varying numbers on that. At one point, there were about 6,000 inmates refusing food. How long they were refusing food for is open to debate. At its peak, it was 13 other prisons. But the core strikers were at prisons where we have these security housing units: Pelican Bay, Tehachapi, and Corcoran. And that is where they had their core support, because they have a list of demands about overhauling how these units are run, and why and how inmates get in and how they get out. The big complaint among inmates and their supporters is that to get out, you have to betray the gang or you have to snitch. And for a gang member, that's dangerous. If you're not in the gang and you're expected to renounce the gang, you're in something of a catch-22.
So where does this go now, with both sides saying they haven't, well, one saying that there was a give and the other said there wasn't?
The department has said that they are conducting a widespread, comprehensive assessment of their policies in terms of gangs and these security housing units. They haven't said that they will make any major changes, but they're doing an assessment. We found out this week that they made an assessment 4 years ago. There were recommendations. They haven't been implemented, so we're just going to have to wait and see.
Well, the next, Josh, your story has nothing to do with prisons, crimes, or gangs, but it has to do with the one topic in this state that's hottest, and that's money and deficit.
Money, money, money. The League of California Cities and the California Redevelopment Agency Association, as widely expected, filed a lawsuit this week challenging the segment of the state budget deal that calls for either eliminating local redevelopment agencies or relocating a lot of their money up into Sacramento so that it can then be pushed out for other purposes. They say that this budget plan basically violates Prop 22, which the voters just approved last November, as a barrier against the state using local funds to balance its budget. The state, of course, feels differently. Darrell Steinberg, the state Senate President pro tem, defended it this week, said this is perfectly legal. We're balancing redevelopment with other public priorities, including education. The Brown administration's finance department said that Prop 22 only dealt with a very narrow issue of what the state can or can't do with property tax increment money. And it didn't address this broader fundamental question of whether redevelopment agencies should even exist. Redevelopment agencies are different things in different places of the state. They have a lot of different functions, from helping to fund stadiums to supporting new business development to paying some city salaries under certain circumstances. But the fact is they've become so integral to a lot of local governments that just ripping that money away is something that these cities just can't countenance.
But one of the things is the redevelopment money supposedly is used to create institutions or facilities that will benefit the local government in some way. So it means losing the money and not getting future benefits?
It means losing that money. Basically, what the state is trying to do is to take that money away by getting rid of these redevelopment agencies, taking it back to Sacramento, and then giving it to the cities as the state's share of local government and education funding. So instead of having money coming from two sources for these local, for the local government and education and stuff, now it's only just going to come from one place, and it's not going to be any more. So it is a loss to these localities.
So we have realignment on the one hand. Is this alignment?
It is sort of, maybe it's reverse realignment. I don't know what you'd actually call it. Actually, maybe the courts will decide what you would call this. Oakland Mayor Gene Kwan, the mayors of Union City and Emeryville got together in Oakland this week and said this is not going to stand. Oakland, Modesto, West Sacramento, other cities have filed declarations in support of the lawsuit. They're pushing the Supreme Court, to which this lawsuit was filed directly, to at least put a stay on this part of the budget by August 15th, while it decides the rest of the case on the merits, so it doesn't go forward any sooner than that.
What about the fact that regions or cities are being asked to pay a certain amount of money, I guess, to stay in the redevelopment business? Is that it?
You could call it a shakedown, I suppose, if you were so inclined to do so. That's certainly the way that the League of Cities and like-minded people would call it. The Brown administration's position is we only have so much public money in this state to go around, that the benefits of a lot of these redevelopment agencies are shaky at best, that there's some evidence that the job creation they've put a claim to isn't really stacked up. There was a survey just came out yesterday, Thursday, from the Los Angeles Times, University of Southern California, that showed that Californians, when they're actually briefed on what these agencies have and haven't done, they're actually okay with some of that money being taken away from them and going to the state to help with the state budget deficit.
Refresh my memory. Is this one of those things that Governor Brown told the state, if we don't make these tax extensions, we're going to have to cut super, super deep? Is this part of that plan? Is this an inroad for him to say, see, I told you?
Part of the deal that resulted from not having any new revenues.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah, you do have to look at it as a part of that. And certainly that's still something that I'm sure the governor would like to be able to remedy next year. But this is, unless the Supreme Court stays it, this would go through a lot sooner.
Can you think of any project that would not happen without these funds?
Oh, I think you'd see job losses. You'd see a halt to various redevelopment, business development projects in cities in every corner of this state if this were to happen.
And our city's pretty much together on this.
Yeah.
San Francisco is not part of that lawsuit.
I've not found any cities so far that are happy about their redevelopment money going away.
I could say not.
Right.
I guess there's no good reason that's been given by San Francisco for not joining in the lawsuit?
No, I wouldn't be surprised if a brief gets filed later down the line.
Okay, Josh, thanks very much. Well, California's court system is facing an unprecedented $350 million of cuts to help close the state's deficit. San Francisco Superior Court is expected to be one of the hardest hits. The court is preparing to lay off 40% of its employees and decrease services to the public. Earlier today, I spoke with presiding judge Katherine Feinstein about the impact. Well, welcome, Judge Feinstein. Why don't you start by telling us what and why is San Francisco in such a unique position in this whole battle over budgets for the court?
I think San Francisco is the first of several courts that are going to be confronting this exact same problem. I think we're the first to go. And the reason is that throughout the year and through last year, the governor and the legislature have come in and taken huge chunks from the judicial branch budget to attempt to solve the state's budget crisis. This year, that left us with a $13.75 million deficit from an operating budget that had already been reduced from the mid-$90 million to about $80 million. And it was the final blow for us.
So what is the effect that you expect to happen if money doesn't materialize from somewhere?
If money doesn't materialize from somewhere, We have sent 60-day layoff notices to 200 of our employees, and I should include that we already are short 18% of our normal workforce by means of attrition. Losing that staff will result in us having to close 25 out of our 63 courtrooms.
My, that's an awful lot.
It is 40%.
Right, and so that's how many employees and how much longer, if that should happen, would it mean to people trying to get their cases before the court?
Well, it will have little to no effect on those cases which we are either constitutionally or statutorily mandated to handle. We will abide by speedy trial rights. We will abide by preference statutes. Anything that mandates that a case be handled in an expeditious fashion, we will follow. Where I think the pain will be felt is in general civil litigation, in family law matters. I think you can expect incredibly long lines to wait to file a document and a very long time for your civil case to proceed through our civil trial system.
Could San Francisco have done things any differently with the condition that the state has been in for the last few years? It's been cut. Was there any way to avoid such a big hunk of people going?
Well, we have undertaken mandatory furloughs. As I said, we have 18% vacancy in staff by attrition. We have done court closure days. We've done pretty much everything that one can do short of layoff. Probably the error that we made was we decided to spend our reserves rather than lay off people last year. And hindsight is 2020. The people could have been laid off last year and maybe we would have been in somewhat better shape, but fortunately our folks were employed another year and access to justice was guaranteed for another year.
Today the Judicial Council that is supposed to look out for these kinds of problems met, and you were there. What did you tell them?
Oh, I told them three things. I told them that personally I was disappointed that their mission and the mission that they reiterate to anyone and everyone is that they will provide support and service to the trial courts had not been fulfilled. I told them that I thought it was imperative that they look at the two biggest programs that are draining millions of dollars from trial court funds. One being an elaborate case management computer system that has so far used $410 million of trial court funds and has proven not to be very effective. It's not in full use in any county, and bits and pieces of it are in use in only 7 counties. And I suggested that perhaps it was time to recognize an error was made, cut their losses, and move on and restore that money to the trial court trust fund.
That's a pretty tough recommendation that you're making there. How did they receive your remarks? Do you think there'll be any changes from where you are now coming out of this?
Probably not.
Was there a discussion of the possibility even?
Well, there was discussion of what they are going to do about construction projects and about this large computer project. However, they seem usually to rubber stamp whatever the staff recommendation is. And I expect that there will be a small amount of backfill that from a combination of sources. I don't think that it will be sufficient to significantly alter our situation.
Overall, what effect do you think this is going to have on the justice system in this county?
Well, I think it's going to have a terrible effect. And it's going to have a terrible effect because it will mainly affect the civil justice system. And we are an epicenter for civil litigation. We have very sophisticated judges. We do a lot of civil litigation. We are the venue of choice in most cases where people may choose to or have the right to file in any California county. And that will no longer be true. And I think economically, San Francisco is home to 14,000 attorneys, and they will surely suffer.
Well, I want to thank you, Judge Feinstein, for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Josh, you also follow this story. The Judicial Council met and made some decisions. What were they?
Well, Judge Feinstein's fears came to pass almost exactly as she said. The Judicial Council voted unanimously to go with the budget it had planned on. They rejected calls to cut the bureaucracy deeper in order to spare the trial courts. The spending on that computerized case management system that she talked about is suspended for 1 year, but the council is considering going back to it in subsequent years. So all of those deep cuts she talked about are going to happen.
Okay, Josh, thanks. And thanks to every one of you here at the table for joining me tonight. Please visit kqed.org/thisweek for ongoing coverage from KQED News on the Bayview story and past stories on Pelican Bay. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.